Right now, relations between the United States and Iran are in one of the most tense phases in recent years, and many analysts describe the current moment as dangerous, not because of loud statements, but because of the combination of several factors simultaneously pushing the situation toward escalation. On the one hand, there is internal instability in Iran, economic pressure, sanctions, and a prolonged crisis of trust in the regime. On the other, active U.S. military preparations in the region, rising activity by its allies, and a sense in Washington that the window of opportunity to pressure Tehran may be closing. According to sources, in recent weeks, the U.S. military has been operating at a heightened level of readiness. Naval presence in the Persian Gulf is being reinforced, reconnaissance flights are increasing, and U.S. and allied bases in the region are being moved to higher levels of combat readiness. Formally, this is explained as the need for deterrence, but experts stress that such a concentration of forces always carries the risk of the situation slipping out of control. Inside Iran, the situation remains extremely tense. The country's economy is under heavy pressure, inflation and falling living standards are undermining social stability, and protest sentiments, even if they do not always spill into the streets on a mass scale, persist across many segments of society. According to analysts, the Iranian regime is now balancing between attempts to retain control and the realization that any external pressure could become a catalyst for a more serious internal crisis. It is against this backdrop that assessments are increasingly heard in Washington that Iran is weakened and vulnerable, and therefore pressure can and should be intensified. However, the key mistake in such calculations, as many experts believe, lies in underestimating one factor: the role of China. Unlike previous stages of confrontation, Iran today is no longer isolated. China has become for Tehran not just an economic partner, but a strategic pillar, albeit one acting with maximum caution and without loud declarations. According to sources, Beijing is actively expanding economic and technological cooperation with Iran, primarily in the energy sector. Iranian oil, despite sanctions, continues to find its way to the Chinese market, often through complex schemes, intermediaries, and blended shipments, allowing Tehran to maintain at least a minimal inflow of foreign currency. For China, this is not merely a matter of profit, but an element of a long-term energy security strategy. Iranian oil remains one of the few sources that Beijing can obtain on terms not dictated by the West. But China's support is not limited to oil alone. Experts increasingly speak of Beijing providing Iran with important technological and intelligence support. This includes satellite data, communication systems, cybersecurity, and monitoring tools that allow Tehran to better control the domestic situation and track external activity. Formally, all of this is presented as civilian or commercial cooperation, but its strategic significance is obvious. China, analysts say, is not interested in Iran entering into a direct war with the United States, but rather in it being resilient enough not to collapse under pressure and not to allow Washington to quickly achieve its goals. This is where the core logic of Chinese policy becomes evident. Beijing does not want a direct confrontation with the United States in the Middle East, but it benefits from America being tied down by prolonged crises and forced to expend resources, attention, and political capital. By supporting Iran at a level sufficient for survival and resistance, China is effectively creating a situation of strategic overload for the United States. According to expert assessments, Beijing understands perfectly well that any major military operation against Iran would inevitably be long, costly, and politically toxic. Even if it does not escalate into a full-scale war, the consequences for the region, oil markets, and the global economy would be serious. This is precisely why China is betting on prolonging and complicating the scenario for Washington. At the same time, Iran is trying to use this support as pragmatically as possible. According to sources, Tehran avoids steps that could give the US a direct pretext for a strike, while continuing to demonstrate its ability to respond asymmetrically through proxy structures, cyber operations, and influence on regional processes. This creates for the US a situation of constant pressure without a clear decision point. Every step forward carries the risk of large-scale escalation. analysts note that the current configuration resembles a dangerous war of attrition. The US assumes that Iran will sooner or later fail to withstand economic and political pressure, while China is betting that Washington will tire first, especially against the backdrop of other global crises in Europe, Asia, and within America itself. In this context, China's assistance to Iran becomes not an act of altruism, but an instrument of global competition. The longer Iran stays afloat, the more resources the US is forced to spend on containment, and the less room it has to maneuver in other regions. Experts emphasize that this is precisely what makes the current moment particularly dangerous. The sides are moving ever closer to a point where any sharp move could lead to irreversible consequences. Iran feels supported and is therefore less inclined to make concessions. The US feels time pressure, and China methodically strengthens its positions while remaining in the shadows. As a result, the Middle East once again turns into an arena of global confrontation, where formally the discussion is about regional problems, but in reality, the question of the future global balance of power is being decided. And the longer this game continues, the higher the risk that one of the participants will decide to change the rules, with consequences that can no longer be localized. Against this backdrop, more and more security specialists are drawing attention to the fact that the current configuration around Iran differs from all previous crises, in that it lacks clear red lines understood by all participants. In past years, there were relatively clear boundaries of what was permissible and what would lead to immediate escalation. Today, these boundaries are blurred. The US increases pressure without declaring a final objective. Iran responds asymmetrically while avoiding direct strikes. China supports Tehran while formally remaining on the sidelines. This three-sided dynamic creates a sense of suspension in which any event can be interpreted as either deliberate or accidental escalation. Experts emphasize that it is precisely under such conditions that miscalculations most often occur. Particular concern is also caused by the factor of regional players who may act autonomously, drawing major powers into a chain of retaliatory steps. For the US, this means the need to constantly balance between demonstrating force and restraint. And for Iran, the search for ways to show resilience without crossing the line into direct confrontation. China, according to analysts, is carefully watching every stage of this game, drawing lessons for its own strategies, above all in the context of Taiwan and global competition. In Beijing, conclusions are being drawn about how sanctions work in practice, what the limits of military pressure are, and how long the world's largest economy is capable of sustaining attention across several crises at once. As a result, the current situation around Iran becomes not only a regional problem, but also a kind of laboratory for future conflicts, where it is being decided whether the world will continue to live by the logic of unilateral pressure or finally move toward multi-layered rivalry without common rules. And the longer this tense pause persists, the higher the probability that the accumulated pressure will one day find an outlet, not necessarily where it is expected, but with consequences that will affect far more than just the Middle East.